Male massage therapist. Backstory: this happened in 2008. I was 18 years old at the time. I worked at the same gas station for a few years. Around the time of this story, I had been in a car accident and really hurt my lower back. At this gas station, there was a ton of regulars. Eventually, you get to know everyone by name, account number, brand of smokes, etc. Also, you get to know who the creepers are. There was one fellow who came in a lot and seemed fairly normal. A bit chatty and self-absorbed, but nothing alarming. He was a firefighter for years. One day he came in and made small talk as per usual. He mentioned he was no longer a firefighter and was pursuing massage therapy. He handed me his card and told me he is needing people to work on his practice. I was familiar with the program he was in and knew students needed to do so many free massages and how to build a customer base. I don't know what I was thinking. My lower back was fucked from the car accident, and I didn't have a lot of spare cash to get a massage. Perfect, I thought. I took his card and shot him a text a few days later. It should have been a red flag when he told me he does massage out of his home, but I really didn't think a former firefighter and a man with a well-known name in the city would harm me in any way at all. I walk in and he has me fill out a form for his program. Basic info like my name, age, gender, and muscular issues. He then leaves the room, so I get undressed and go under the sheet. This was my first massage, so I had no idea what was normal. He asked me to strip down to my underwear. Red flag number 2. As he begins, we are chatting mostly about how I hurt my back. He's explaining to me what he's doing and how each technique will benefit me. He then asked me if I have any other muscular pain. Nope. I mentioned I play a lot of sports and sometimes get stiffer after a game, but nothing major or unmanageable. He then asked if I would like him to work on my legs. I declined. He insists. I decline. He insists. I hesitantly follow his instructions to turn over onto my back. Now, I know many people may say this is my fault, and I was just stupid to put myself in this position. Yet this was a poor choice, but I was trusting and not yet jaded. At this time, I struggled with depression and cut myself. All of my scars were on my upper thighs. I didn't have any fresh wounds, but the scars were there and very noticeable. He tucks the sheets into my underwear and says, "Well, you don't see that every day. Yikes, that's bad. Ah, shit. That's done." He's massaging my thighs and now I'm freaked out. "I'm just going to insert my fingers," he says, moving his fingers right up to my pubic bone. I flipped over instantly and said I was done and wanted to go. I wanted to just run, but I was basically naked. "Okay," he says, exasperated. He leaves the room. I throw on my clothes and leave without a word. I don't tell a soul for years. Eventually I told some close friends 2 years ago. His name popped up in the news. 12 counts of sexual assault, spanning from 2008 until then. My heart sank. I was likely one of the first. I marched my way to the police station and filed my report. I couldn't believe the stories I heard of other women's experiences. It sounded like he got a lot more hands-on than he did with me. He went as far as raping women and assaulting girls as young as 12. Luckily, he lost his license and now due for trial this fall. I hope he rots in jail, you piece of shit. Let's not ever meet again. Pedophile doctor. I am following Reddit for years and have been thinking about making an account and sharing my story. So here I am. I had a severe case of agoraphobia since I was 6 years old. I'm 19 now, female. It was in 2005-2006 at the time. In the country I live in, there are no psychiatrists for kids, only regular doctors, but they weren't helpful anyways. Nobody knew what was wrong with me until 2012 when I was diagnosed. So me, my parents, and the rest of the family were desperate and felt helpless. Then someone my parents knew well informed us to see a hypnotherapist in a few towns away from ours. We went. Met the man. He was in his late 60s, early 70s and seemed so nice, understood me, didn't think I was a nutjob. Anyways, I saw salvation in him and kinda looked at him as my grandparent. There were some red flags, of course, but as a 6-year-old, I've missed them all. My mother was always afraid of him because he insisted on doing therapy alone with me in another room while she waited. First few therapies were okay, not very helpful, but okay. That is until one day, I asked him already lying on his couch to go to the toilet, to which he replied with, "Do you need to pee or poop?" Sure, it was a weird question, but I thought he had asked it to know how long I'll be in the toilet. Boy, was I wrong. I answered that I need to pee, and he put his fingers down in my lady part. This got me so confused. I, of course, still had no idea about sex, but it felt weird. I didn't tell my parents. I cried a lot, but thought that I needed to suck it up because I will be no longer afraid and have panic attacks and such. Since then, he didn't do it anymore, thank God. He called my parents on a regular basis when they came home, asking them to let me go on vacation with him, which of course they politely declined. A few years after, and he's arrested for child pornography and have raped a few boys. It all clicked in my head, and I told my parents everything. We went to the police, gave statements, and that was it. He died in prison, natural cause. Even though you're dead, I hope we'll never meet in the afterlife or whatever is up there. Thank God. My last therapy appointment. It was February of my senior year of high school. Senior year was so emotionally draining. I had broken up with my long-term boyfriend just a week before, and I lost my best friend back in September. They have left me in a very fragile mental state, but I wanted to get better. I felt so free for the first time in years, and I thought with a bit of therapy, I'll be feeling better well before I graduated. The city I lived in at this time offered free youth counseling, a few neighborhoods away from mine, and I jumped on this offer. I made an appointment for after school on Thursday, 26th of February 2015. I went to the therapy appointment with a friend that lived near the youth center. She waited outside for me while I chatted with the therapist and came up with a game plan. Once a week appointments for the next 2 months, and we reevaluate and see where I was at. I was so happy to be working towards healing myself. We wandered to a nearby McDonald's and split a small fry before we both decided to leave. She hopped on her bus to her nearby house, and I hopped on my bus to the subway. The city was laid out like a grid with its public transit, and I was lucky enough to live a block away from a major subway station. It was a quick 10-minute walk home from the station, which I often made quicker by cutting through a park. The hypotenuse of the triangle being shorter than the two sides was always my mental justification for cutting through the park. I was walking up to the park listening to Wild for the Night by A$AP Rocky and switched to Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars as I crossed onto the grass. I had those stupid beat noise isolating earphones and was enjoying the build up to the chorus when it happened. A hand flew over my mouth. I instantly assumed it was my ex playing a prank on me and tried to murmur his name through the hand. Shuf! The person responded by jerking my head back hard, and in that moment I knew this wasn't a joke. This was my moment. My mom had warned me about growing up. As I was having this inner realization, the person's other hand inched up my skirt, and he began trying to rip through my tights. The music was still blaring in my ears with Bruno Mars crooning to Don't Believe Him, Just Watch. I reached up and scratched the hand over my mouth as hard as I could, hoping he would drop it so I could scream. He held me harder, so I started to kick. I was wearing 4-inch heels, and drove one as hard as I could into the top of his foot. He lost his balance, and I swiveled away, kicking him as hard as I could. I ripped my headphones out and began to scream for help as he started to run away from me. I was calling 911 as I saw a few lights click on in nearby houses. One guy came onto his balcony, and I ran in the direction of his home, screaming, "Please help! Someone just tried to grab me!" They stepped inside. When dispatch picked up, where they were a few moments later, I watched the path the guy took as he ran from me, and made note of what physical features I could. He was a few inches taller than me, likely 5'10", was rather thin, and was of Asian descent with spiked up hair. That description matched no one I knew. I thought it was random. The police released dogs and asked if they could come to my house to swab for DNA and get a full statement from me. My parents were here at this point and readily agreed. I was just shell-shocked. It didn't feel real. They scraped my fingernails for DNA and took my statement. Midway through, my dog started barking super loud outside. I snapped at my mom to take care of the dog, and then realized our dog was curled up by my mom's feet. We walked to the kitchen, which overlooked the backyard. The police dogs had congregated below my bedroom window. The guy who attacked me either came from my house to attack me or ran to my house immediately afterwards. It wasn't random, I was a target. After many talks with the police, one detective noticed something. He realized I had been stalked through social media for years. The guy who attacked me is alive, and brain dead today to my best knowledge. He had been paid by my stalker to attack me. He was a local college student, struggling with student debt. Police had upped patrols in my neighborhood, and a few days after he attacked me, he snapped. He He was apparently in the car with his father, saw a bunch of police cars up ahead, thought they had found him and gave up. He got out of the car, ran to the nearest bridge, and jumped. I wasn't told until August, months after the attack. I felt heartbroken for the kid and his family. The crime didn't justify the punishment he self-inflicted. My stalker continued their harassment for another year following this, but this was the only time I got physically attacked by them. To my knowledge, my stalker has never faced any consequences for their actions. I don't know them. The detective that handled this case had a very clear idea of who they were, but they were much younger than I was, 17 to like 14-ish, and he wasn't able to file charges against them. Stalker? Let's not meet. Guy who attacked me. I'm so fucking sorry. Convulsion therapy. About 2 or 3 years ago, my girlfriend lived in a neighborhood in a somewhat large Australian city that surrounded a hospital. It wasn't a very good neighborhood, lots of council housing, and as I worked nights, I used to constantly worry about her safety. It's ironic that the only even halfway strange or possibly dangerous thing I saw while she was living there occurred in broad daylight. I was driving to her place from work in my beat-up old Ute, and about 3 or 4 p.m. on a weekday. Her apartment was in a unit block located a few twisting streets away from a busy main road, which was where most of the council housing and rundown Queenslanders were. It's rare in Australia, as far as I've seen living in the city, to see people lounging on stoops or on the street, but it happened a lot around there. You drive past and there'd almost always be 4 or 5 people, a mix of Aboriginal and white trash, usually gathered around a shopping cart for some reason, drinking goon or tallies of cheap beer, and they were always staring hard. It put me on guard every time I went past. If it wasn't for that, I may have noticed the woman I caught in my rearview mirror as I was going down one of the nicer streets on the way to my girlfriend's place. She was walking towards a group of 3 Aboriginal fellas at a very brisk pace. She was wearing jogging gear, mesh shorts, a sports tank top, tennis shoes, and she was sweating a lot. She had a ponytail. I was checking her out, if I'm being honest, and I was just wondering what a well-to-do woman like that was doing jogging or fast walking down this dirty street when she suddenly went ramrod straight and fell onto her back. I had never seen somebody convulse before. I had absolutely no idea what was going on, so for a bit I kept driving, looking between my windshield and this woman, flopping around in my rear view. Her arms and legs were completely straight. All the movement seemed to come from her core. It was like that scene in The Godfather when Sonny gets gunned down at the toll booth. I eventually broke out of my little panic state, halfway down the block at this point, and parked. I grabbed my phone and jumped out of the car and sprinted up to where she was still convulsing. She moved from the sidewalk now and was basically in the middle of the street. A few cars went past, moving slowly around them. I made eye contact with some woman in a Prius and she shrugged at me. When I reached her, the 3 Aboriginals who'd been drinking up the block were standing around her. One was stroking her hair. They'd all been drinking. It was 2 men and a woman who I see constantly around the neighborhood. Over the past few days, one had sort of mugged me a couple of weeks ago. One had sort of kind of mugged me about a week ago. That old "don't fucking lie to me, I know you got change" thing. I stepped up, holding my phone, and the woman who'd been convulsing suddenly stopped and her upper body saw straight up. Her legs were straight on the asphalt, one bleeding a little. Her eyes were fucking crazy. She didn't look like a suburban type like I originally thought. Her hair was matted and greasy, and she had cold sores and a very blank stare. I stammered something along the lines of, should I call an ambulance? Are you okay? One of the Aboriginals, a very large woman who was cross-eyed, manning a shopping cart, rolled up next to me, kind of sliding around me. The woman on the ground said she was alright. Then she asked me for a smoke. They were all staring at me. I started to get a very bad feeling, so I said sorry. I don't smoke. And I turned around and quick walked back to my UTE. I lied, I do smoke and I had cigs, but I just had this feeling that something wasn't right. I got into my car and locked the doors and sat there a minute, trying to figure out what had just happened and whether or not I'd done the right thing by just walking away in that situation. When I looked in my rear view again, they were all gone. The street was completely empty. I lit a cigarette and drove to my girlfriend's place. When I told her the story, she said the same thing had happened to her roommate a month or so previously. I still think about it and still wonder, all these years later, whether or not that woman was actually convulsing. I'll tell you one thing though, after that, the neighborhood didn't scare me so much. Mental hospitals don't always want to help you. I like to preface this by saying that not all mental health professionals are terrible people. Good doctors and medication have saved my life. I didn't grow up in the US also, so if you see something in the story that makes you go, that's not how that works, keep in mind that other countries might have different laws. Furthermore, this describes my experiences with staying at a mental hospital, so prepare for triggers. Alright, here we go. I was a troubled kid. I'm kind of a troubled person in general. But when I was in my early teens, specifically in the story I was 14 years old, I was cutting, suicidal, and refusing to go to school. I was put on a waiting list for a children's mental hospital. I know now that the fact that I was on that waiting list for close to half a year should have been the first warning sign. At the time, I enjoyed being on sick leave from school, which basically meant I got to play The Sims until 6 in the morning for 5 months straight. But when I had to pack my stuff to actually go to the hospital, I, of course, didn't really want to go. I wanted to get help, don't get me wrong, but the idea of being away from home for 6 weeks, which is the standard time they take to analyze and want you to give a diagnosis, after which you can choose to pursue treatment, scared me. I arrived at the hospital in tears, my mom carried my suitcase for me. The nurses noticed that obviously didn't want to stay. "Are you here on your own free will?" the doctor asked me. I shook my head. They just shrugged it off, saying that they could get a judicial decision forcing me to stay there. I never go to talk to a judge. I never got to defend or explain myself. As far as I know, my parents didn't talk to a judge either. A judge glossed over my medical history and then signed a piece of paper that forced me to stay in this hellhole for 6 weeks. The contents of my suitcase were searched, and I remember the feeling like I had just arrived in prison. The first terrifying thing happened on my first night. As a cutter, my arms were in horrific shape. When wounds heal, they itch. I scratch open some of the old scabs, and when I went to the nurse to ask for a bandage, everyone went nuts. In their eyes, I purposefully harmed myself, which they couldn't prove, but okay. What do you do when a 14-year-old mental patient harms herself? Talk to her? Try to help? Nah, you take away all of her jewelry, a necklace from my mom, and a bracelet from my ex-girlfriend, who at the time I still had very strong feelings for, and send her off to the timeout room for 24 hours. The timeout room was a small room with a big window that could just barely fit a bed. If I had to use the bathroom, I had to ask a nurse to accompany me. And no joke, at one point I was in the bathroom with a nurse standing guard in front of the door. She asked if I was doing okay, and I sarcastically responded with, "No, I'm cutting myself with the toilet paper." She goes, "Really?" and rips open the door. Fucking Christ. All of my clothes, including underwear and PJs, were taken from my room and kept in the front office for the time I stayed in the room. So whenever I needed clothes when I was in the timeout room, I had to go up to the front office to ask for them. But apart from having to ask for clothes and bathroom trips, I was completely left alone in that room. No one ever came to check on me. Getting out of the timeout room wasn't a lot better. For the first week or two, I had horrible stomach problems. I would get up multiple times a night to use the bathroom, which, by the way, you didn't have one of in your room. You had to walk down the hall to the bathrooms. Because my stomach kept me up all night, I would often not get enough sleep and end up sleeping through the day, which led to me not taking part in group activities. And instead of, waking me up, I was bitched at, and I quote, If I was up all night, roaming the halls, I'd be tired too. What do you want me to do, just shit the bed, or... And because I didn't partake in group activities, I couldn't earn outside time either. Yes, I had to earn going outside. Even just sitting on the front steps with a nurse right next to me had to be earned. So for the first 6 weeks, I was effectively locked up, except for school and weekends, where I was allowed to go home. It was blatantly obvious that none of the nurses really cared about any of the patients. They weren't even real nurses. They were more like prison guards. One of them straight up looked like a homeless guy. Another sounded like she'd been smoking 5 packs of smokes a day all her life. And I mean all. All of them were chain smokers. Every free second they had, they'd use for smoke breaks. Right outside the door, too, with the doors open, so that all the other kids who were currently going through nicotine withdrawals could smell the cigarette smoke. I saw a real nurse once a week. She mainly checked for self-harm. One time, I self-harmed at home over the weekend. I told her my pet bunny did it, and she believed me. Within 6 weeks of staying at the mental hospital, I saw a psychiatrist a whooping 2 times, one for general introduction, and one for an IQ test. Oh, and did I mention that you were allowed to have a razor in the shower? Or the huge bird spider that sat in the corner of one of the showers the entire time I stayed there? Or the cobwebs and silver fish that were everywhere? Anyone who's ever struggled with mental illness probably knows that sentences like, just pull yourself together, or get over it, are the least helpful things one could say to a mentally ill person. I'd never heard that so much in my entire life. There was one instance when another patient, who was deathly afraid of spiders, came running out of her room in a borderline panic attack because she had woken up to a spider directly in front of her face. Know what they told her? Don't be such a baby! It's just a spider! They gave her a broom for her to get rid of the spider herself, which obviously she couldn't do. My roommates and I ended up helping her. Both of us were scared of spiders as well, mind you. But possibly the most outrageous thing happened on my second to last day. Someone had told the guards that I had smuggled in a razor blade, so they pulled me out of the breakfast and searched my body from top to bottom, stripping me naked, with the door to the nurse's room wide open. When they didn't find a razor blade on me, they tore my room apart. They didn't find one there either, but found one laying on the floor in the hallway. It was even still in its wrapper. I wasn't the only patient who cut herself. As a matter of fact, I don't think there was a single female patient who didn't cut herself. The blade could have belonged to anyone. They had no proof it was mine, but of course it was deemed that it was mine, and despite me not having any new cuts on my arms even, I was thrown into the timeout room for another 24 hours, literally my last 24 hours, and they paid so little attention to the timeout room that a fellow inmate was able to slip a letter with a razor blade inside under the door so I could take out my frustrations on myself. In case any of you were wondering where my parents were in all of this, my mother wanted me to get out of that place as soon as she heard about the timeout room, but since my parents had joint custody, she needed my father to agree to it. My father deserves a let's not meet story for himself, but to make it short, he hadn't talked to me in over 4 years, but was somehow convinced that I needed help and refused to get me out of there. My final diagnosis from that place? Narcissistic neurosis. I was 14, and to this day, I have no idea how they came up with any kind of diagnosis, considering I had actually seen a doctor a total of 2 fucking times. Additionally, this result was delivered to us, my parents and I, by the head doctor of the hospital, who I'd never seen in my whole entire life, during a conclusive meeting on my last day. I was offered to stay and start behavioral therapy, but I guess it goes without saying that I politely declined that offer. Every therapist and psychiatrist I've talked to since, and trust me, there's been a few over the last 7 years, have disregarded that diagnosis entirely. Some have even laughed at it. I'm currently diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, and a panic disorder, and my current psychiatrist has suggested I might suffer from borderline personality disorder. I guess the moral of the story is to always do research on the hospital you plan on getting yourself admitted to. I sure as shit hope I never have to see any of the guards, nurses, or doctors ever again.